Welcome back. This is episode 3 of The Bible Place, All the Difference podcast, and it is going to be a good day. So, All the Difference is the teaching ministry of Dr. Wayne Braudrick, the lead pastor of Frisco Bible Church. In the Bible Place series, we seek to uncover the significance of the times and locations of the biblical events to help you understand and engage with the scriptures. And in today's episode, we're going to travel to Jerusalem and Bethany to explore the background and culture of life in the biblical era. So, if this has been a great podcast for you, if it's been helpful to you in any way, we would love and be honored if you would take a second to make sure that you're subscribed and that you give it a rating and also write a review. That will really, really help us to expand the reach of the podcast. And we're just super, super glad that you can join us. And we hope and pray that you will learn, and through your learning, that you will understand the Bible and the scriptures better, and that will make an impact on your life and make a difference in your life. So, here we go. Pastor Wayne, where are we headed today?
Today we're in John 2 and 3, our third episode in John. We again, there's a lot we won't cover. This is not a commentary meeting. No. It's a Bible place. So we're looking at the places, and we pick it up in chapter 2. So here we go, verse 15. The Jewish Passover was near, and so Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple, he found people selling oxen, sheep, and doves, and he also found the money changers sitting there. After making a whip out of cords, he drove everyone out of the temple with their sheep and oxen. He also poured out the money changers' coins and overturned their tables. He told those who were selling doves, "Get these things out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a marketplace." And his disciples remembered that it is written, that's the Psalm 69, "Zeal for your house will consume me." Why don't you pick it up there, because I need a drink.
Sure. So the Jews replied to him, "What sign will you show us for doing these things?" Jesus answered, "Destroy this temple, and I will raise it up in 3 days." Therefore the Jews said, "This temple took 46 years to build, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking about the temple of his body. So when he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the statement Jesus had made. While he was in Jerusalem during the Passover festival, many believed in his name when they saw the signs he was doing. Jesus, however, would not entrust himself to them, since he knew them all, and because he did not need anyone to testify about men, for he himself knew what was in a man. So interesting.
Especially, okay, this isn't our purpose here, but especially when you take, there's a thread that John's going to tease out about entrusting himself to people and about testimony. It's going to go all the way through, but that's not our point.
Well, one thing too about like reading this out loud, it's one thing, I read it in my devotions or just read it to myself, read it silently. I have a tendency to try to like read so fast that I skip over things. And forcing to read out loud makes different places, makes different words, and it makes the scene more alive. It makes me actually envision it better.
Oh, it's so true. So I read very quickly, and I praise God for that. It's great.
Yeah.
But all the years that I've read books out loud to kids, those books I know better than any others because I was forced to read them out loud. And you have to slow yourself. Believe it or not, this is my voice slowed down. So
that's really true.
All right. So placial study in Scripture can be conducted a couple of different ways. For this session today, we're going to look at the text according to the 3 major big ideas that you use when you're trying to study place: location, locale, sense of place. So let's go to location. That's the geography of a spot. They went up to Jerusalem. That's because Jerusalem is high up. So location. Yes, there's a spiritual aspect to that as well, but that's the main point. Is it towers hundreds of feet above all those surrounding valleys, thousands of feet above the 2 lowest spots on earth that are right down the road from it, the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. The Great Rift Valley, east and north and south of Jerusalem, is very deep. The ancient city was apparently built on the hill where Abraham went with his son Isaac. If you don't know the story, you can read about it in Genesis. Abram goes with Isaac, and they journey where God tells them to go to make a sacrifice. Isaac is not a little boy. That's not the word that's used in the Hebrew. Abraham is quite old, although miraculously, wonderfully hale and hearty. Actually, probably like one of your relatives who seem to live forever.
I just hope that
And
I can be like that when I'm that old.
no kidding.
Like,
And
probably have no chance, but
well, I don't know.
I'll try.
You do well. They go up to the hill. Here's the wood. Here's the fire. Where's the sacrifice? And God will provide. A wonderful Hebrew play on words. It appears the word he uses, Moriah, God will provide, actually came from a different language, from Akkadian, which is where Abraham grew up, and he became the first greatly known believer in the Lord from the old Babylonian Empire. He trusted Yahweh, had a personal relationship with him by faith, and so there seems to be some real memory here. We'll get to that in sense of place, drawing from his childhood. So he goes there, uses this wild word, and God provides the ram caught by his horns, and it becomes this beautiful picture of what Abraham was doing in trusting the Lord. And of course, that comes full circle when we get to John, because we know the ram that is going to be sacrificed is Jesus. God is going to do what he asked Abraham to do, but never expected him to fulfill. All right. So near that town, some people later, hundreds of years later, called the Jebus, constructed a town. And I told you about the deep topography, or really steep. They built this town kind of up into the hill. Jared, if you would, summarize for us, David, a couple hundred years after that, conquers the city. And Scripture tells us a little bit about it. Tell us what happened.
Yeah. So David, after he's been made king of Judah, they make him king over all of Israel, and now it's time to conquer the land and make sure that he is installed as king over everything, and that he's got his kingdom and his capital city, as it were. So they go and they get there, and we find it in 2 Samuel chapter 4. They come up to the city that the Jebusites have created, and David's got his army, and they look down on him. And I think of, there's so many movie scenes that come to mind when I think of this. The first one that comes to mind is the all-time classic Monty Python, where you have the French knights on top of the wall, and they're just mocking and making fun of and teasing. They're like, "You can't do anything.
Silly
Go away, you English kniggets." And it's awesome. So that's the first thing that I picture.
Right.
Is them, and the text literally has them making fun of David. Oh,
right.
Our blind and our lame could protect us from you. You can't get through these walls. None of that. So David then, he sees a weakness in the wall, and he sends his men through a water shaft.
Right.
So the second thing that I think of is the Battle of Helm's Deep, because in Helm's Deep you have I got so many movie references going through my mind. So I think of Helm's Deep.
But David did not have a special exploding device. We should make that clear.
He did not. I'm sure it would have made things easier. But so the Battle of Helm's Deep, they have Saruman builds this explosive, and they plant underneath, blow up the wall, and that's what allows the orcs to get in. David just sends his men through the water shaft. So the one weak point in the wall is a water shaft.
Right.
Which also, maybe because Star Wars and Andor and stuff is going on, I think of the Death Star and the exhaust shaft that is the single point of failure in the entire thing, and is what is used by the rebellion to destroy the Death Star. Same thing here. So David sends some of his men into the city through the water shaft, and they conquer it from within.
Yeah. And which was a very standard. Siege warfare was somewhat poorly developed at this time, and so a standard way to win was to get inside and have the gates opened. And so that makes sense. We don't know. I don't believe those who tell me they think they know. We don't know exactly what water shaft that was.
No.
But there are a number of them there. There's an old rift that is called the Canaanite Rift that runs kind of down to the tombs of the kings of Judah, perpendicular to Hezekiah's tunnel, which was built much, much later. It probably was somewhere in that vicinity, but the high ground is the big idea. Going up a water shaft, if you lose surprise for a moment, you're toast.
Yeah.
So because they do not have the high ground, they're going uphill. Again, this is very steep. By the way, a guy in our church the other day, he sent me a photo of his son in his pajamas, and he was standing on the stairs holding his little toy sword, and he said,
I know where this is going.
I just had the most proud parenting moment of my life. And so I wrote back, okay, I'll buy it. What way? He said, he looked at me and said, ha ha, I have the high ground. And that is pretty good.
Is the child old enough to have seen episode 3?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No. So,
Okay.
that's just good
That's
parenting.
even just kind of built like having the high ground. It's
Right.
easier to defend the high ground
Always.
than always.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
So layers, like ogres and onions, ancient cities have layers. So when we read,
Okay, so far we're at 4 different
four movies, yeah,
movie
that's right.
references. How
Yeah.
many will we hit by the
I
end?
think we may be at 5. Anyway, so when you read about Jerusalem, you need to understand something. So that's the original city we told you about on this steep spot.
Mm-hmm.
It grew vertically because things do over time, and it grew horizontally. So throughout the period to where we get in John chapter 2, this small city was expanded first to an area called the Ophel and to what was called the city of David. So it expanded, we think it seems southwest, which makes sense because the hard south and the east were deep valleys, which became less deep over time. That happens, but there's still, even today, there's a pretty good pitch there.
Yeah.
And so it expanded that way, and that's how it was for a long time. People today will go to Jerusalem and say, "Oh, the old city walls. Those are not old.
No.
Those are from Salimin the Magnificent, the Muslim ruler in 1200. When did he build those wells?
Well, for Americans, those are old.
Right. Oh, yeah, right.
But they're not.
They're not
They're
old.
not first century. They're not.
No.
1200 BC or
Right.
anything like that.
So we don't have those original walls. We have some little parts. We have some from 500 years after David with Hezekiah, with some wall. We've got excavation going on right now above what we talked about, Hezekiah's tunnel, and it appears, it's not open to the public yet, but it appears there are some walls there that would be Solomonic time period. But when we get to the first century here, we don't know what the walls were really like. One of the weird things people struggle with in terms of walls is that most of you watching this podcast do not live in a walled city.
No.
That means you are in a very safe, wealthy place. Mm-hmm. When you don't have walls, if you don't need walls, then you have such a strong economy and or strong army that you don't need to have a defensive barrier. So the fact that walls are built should tell you, oh, they may have been strong, but they weren't all powerful in their area. Otherwise, they don't build walls, right?
One of the things that came out in the last study tour we took to Turkey was very interesting just walking through, and I asked the group, what do you notice about these cities that we're going to? Because many of them had also been to Israel, and somebody got it right. There's not big walls. So you go to Laodicea, you go to Ephesus. There's no walls around Ephesus.
No. Oh, goody gracious.
And so we talked about that, and it's very interesting because the Romans were really the first ones who didn't have to wall their cities because they built the roads and they could get their army from one place to another very quickly. So nobody really messed with them at their heyday.
No, it's true. And theirs lasted longer. So you've got ones like Lydia, like Pergamon that you went to in Turkey, where there weren't walls at first because Croesus was as wealthy as Croesus. So anyway, so you could always buy people off even if you didn't have a huge army.
Sure.
They didn't want to mess with you. They liked the money train. So so you didn't have to have those. But when you build them, it's usually a sign of either turmoil in the world outside or weakness in the country. In Solomon and David's case, it's turmoil in the world outside. They're actually not a weak country. They will become weak in the 1,000 years between David and Jesus.
Yeah.
When we get to the first century, there's Roman walls, but they're not massive because the Roman Empire didn't need them.
No.
Okay? So when they go up to Jerusalem, we're looking at that. Now, Rome takes us to the second issue, which is locale. So that's location, geography. Now let's get to the government, the systems, all the things that make up the locale. Let's talk about Roman rule first. It's such a mixed bag. There were positives. Low crime, protection that we talked about, excellent growth systems. If you wanted to start a business, being in the empire was fantastic. Not a ton of red tape, great stuff to do. Lifespans were so much different than outside the empire. 70-year lifespans inside the Roman Empire was the norm. The book of Hebrews actually references that. And so that was not true outside of the empire. When we read about New Testament Jerusalem, we need to understand it was a Roman city. But you got to grasp some negatives too. Jews in Jerusalem, and these are Jews we're talking about here in John 2, they faced a lot of restrictions on their life, especially in Jerusalem, in the capital city, which had to be a little bothersome. They could not run for public office because they weren't Roman citizens, except for the very few who were Roman citizens. Because they had fought Rome before they were conquered. They fought Rome with Pompey the Great. They fought Rome with Tiberius. Very few people were given citizenship. Now, in Asia Minor, where we were just talking about modern Turkey, totally different picture. Nearly every kingdom there said, "Oh, Rome, would you adopt us? We'd love to give you our kingdom." And so they got citizenship, which is almost certainly what happened to a guy named Saul of Tarsus that you know as the Apostle Paul. That's why he had Roman citizenship. Inside Jerusalem, there's another layer. Sorry, I had to do that in my ogre accent.
Absolutely.
There was a council that the Romans allowed the Jews to have. Like I said, it's a mixed bag. It's a Roman city, good and bad, but it's still the Jewish capital. It is their city. And you didn't just go up to Jerusalem physically. You went up in terms of ascension spiritually, because this is the mount of the Lord. So there was a council that was set aside to govern all religious life in Israel, but especially inside Jerusalem. That's where their power was strongest. And they were to keep everything in line with Moses' law. It was called the Sanhedrin. It was dominated by the Sadducee sect. There was another group called the Pharisee sect, and they really looked down their noses at each other. If you would take us through, Jared's got a pretty cool little brief distinction between Sadducees and Pharisees.
Yeah, the Sadducees, they're so weird. They aligned with and were supported by the Roman power, so they had the backing of the government that was overruling, and that automatically puts them at odds with their own people. They were influential in Jerusalem, both the Sanhedrin and the temple, and they accepted only Moses' books, theological. They were liberal, leaning toward atheism. They scoffed at resurrection. We see that in the Gospels a couple of times. And actually, in episode 1, I made a comment that I can't remember Jesus interacting with Sadducees outside Jerusalem. I was wrong.
Oh, really?
I went back and looked it up. I was like, I'm curious. Was I right about this? I was absolutely wrong.
Was it in Judea?
There is some, yeah. So
but it's not
Matthew
up in Galilee.
3:7 at Jesus' baptism.
Okay, in Judea. All right.
In the Jordan, both the Sadducees and Pharisees come out there. And then in Matthew 16:1, Jesus was in Magadan, and I could not find.
We don't know where it is.
We don't know where it is. Yeah. No one knows exactly where this is located, but we do know that he got into a boat. So this isn't Jerusalem.
No.
There's not a whole lot of sea life. Actually, there's none in Jerusalem.
None. Yeah.
So it was not in Jerusalem. The other encounters in Mark 22, Mark 12, Matthew 22, Mark 12, and Luke 20, those were in Jerusalem.
Okay.
And at least two of those are just a repeat.
Those
of
are the
same
ones
story.
I think
But
of. Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Those are the ones that are most that were in my mind. So I was wrong.
I know.
They did go and travel to see Jesus, and he encountered them outside of Jerusalem.
Well, and there were Sadducees outside of Jerusalem, but not like Pharisees.
No.
Okay, still about Pharisees.
And
Go ahead.
it was their seat of power.
The Sanhedrin
was their seat
their
of power.
thing.
That was where they would go to. They ventured out every once in a while, apparently. So the Pharisees, they were aligned with and supported by the common Jews, and they were influential in the synagogues, the places of learning outside of the temple, where the Jews would come to once a week to read through the scrolls and to discuss. And those synagogues are awesome. They're recognized in all the Old Testament writings. They're theologically conservative, but definitely lean to legalism.
Yeah.
Very, very much so.
And not just the way we bandy that word about now with, that seems strict. It was actually classical legalism. In other words, you have to earn, even though since Abraham, salvation has been clear that it's by God's grace through faith alone. You trust him. They leaned toward, you've got to do all the right things to earn your salvation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they saw the law as what would bring salvation, and I think they feared so much that Israel would go again toward idolatry, that they set up their own laws and rules to make sure people couldn't even get close to that line, that they were guard them so that they can't. And then that's where we see Jesus doing stuff on the Sabbath, and like, why do you break the Sabbath? Why don't your disciples wash their hands like we wash our hands? And there's nothing in the scriptures about washing your hands a certain way. That's like, you may only use this brand of soap. There's nothing in there like that, but they instituted that to, I think, in many ways, in order to make sure people couldn't even get close to the line. So it's kind of a mixed bag too.
It is, It's the they were formed, as far as we can tell, during the Babylonian captivity, and it's like they never forgot the trauma of Israel appropriately being ejected from their land. And they were trying very hard to make sure it couldn't happen again. But the problem is, you end up playing God.
Exactly.
And that's the struggle with Sadducee and Phariseeism. You end up playing God, either from a liberal perspective or from a legalistic perspective.
Yeah, it's just two sides of the same coin.
Yep.
Now, the Pharisees did believe in the resurrection.
True.
So that's a good thing. And it's all going to be important when we meet Nicodemus. He's a Pharisee on the Sanhedrin. So it's very interesting. There's a lot of tension there. You can, as you read it, you can feel the tension, especially if you read it out loud.
Right. Which we've heard is a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay, so third part of locale. Locale is the infrastructure. Obviously, the biggest thing in what we read was the temple. That's the main image. Okay, so to depict Herod's temple, let me take you back. Let's get in the Wayback Machine, Mr. Peabody. And if any of you ever watched Bullwinkle, Rocky and Bullwinkle. So we go back in the Wayback Machine. So that hill, presumably the same one where Abraham was willing to obey the Lord, knowing God would provide. David purchases that hill, and he does it as an act of faith because of a plague. Really cool story you can read about. And the person offers it and says, oh my goodness, yes, it's for the Lord. No, we're going to purchase it. And that's significant because there is a tie to place that is found when you buy something. Where we live, there's an interesting law that if, it's a very old law, but it's never been changed. If school kids cut across my property and wear a path down through the grass, then they have right of way to that. And I can never put a fence up or anything else, which probably would be great with me. Come on, kids, we'd love it. But that's a law. But even that doesn't bring the same sense of ownership. They don't own it. They just have a right of transit. I own it. I paid money for it. And when we get to places in the ancient Near East, these are money was paid. And so this place since 900 BC has been the place where the temple was going to be built. And so Solomon then builds a temple there. It is absolutely the wonder of the world. It's not even, I can't even describe it. What's something that is just blows our mind? So we went, my kids wanted to go to Universal Studios, so I saved up for 40 years and we went to Universal, and all the Harry Potter stuff was just delightful. It was amazing. I mean, just incredible. That all cost, as expensive as all that is.
Yeah.
That all cost, by my reckoning, maybe the whole place cost maybe 1/20th of what Solomon's temple cost in real dollars.
It's crazy. Like reading the description of the temple and things that are plated in gold, the wood that was used that came from, I don't even know how many miles away.
Right,
but
yeah. Floated by sea.
Yeah, floated by sea. And the stones that were carved before being transported to the temple site. And some of the stones are so big.
Yeah, so Solomon's retaining wall, well, part of it is still there. A bunch of that's Herod's. But there are stones there that that you can see weigh. How the biggest one's considered to be 600 tons.
Currently 600 tons.
Yeah.
We got to see this on our last trip, on our last study tour. We did the Rabbinic Wall Tunnel tour. It was amazing. One of the stones you see is 600 tons, and that's because they estimate that 400 tons of it was chipped out by the Romans when the Romans in AD 70 tore everything down. Right. And they're destroying everything left and right. And they get to this stone in this part of the wall, and they start ripping it up, and then they just give up because it's too big, it's too heavy. They just stop. Yeah. So what is estimated to have been 1,000-pound or 1,000-ton stone is now about 600 tons.
A ton is 2,000 pounds. So
yeah,
1,000 times 2,000.
That's real heavy.
That's a lot. That's 20 million pounds.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So or is it 200? No, 20. This was a monumental structure, and it was the most glorious thing in the world. A few hundred years after this, you would have places that are wonderful to go to, like in Greece, where you can go to the National Museum and see Agamemnon's burial mask. It's not probably really Agamemnon, but it's from that town, and you can go to Mycenae and all those places, and there's some gold, and you're like, wow! Imagine that on unbelievable steroids, and that's what you had, and so this was an amazing place. When the Babylonians destroyed it, 600 years or so before our story we're into right now, we need to understand the locale was raised. It was not on their first time, not on their second time, but on their third time to come in and take. It was raised. The mount appears to have been left, but nothing else. The walls around the city, nothing left, which leads to the book of Nehemiah and all this. So that's the mindset when Ezra and Nehemiah and they come back with God's signet ring, and they Zerubbabel helps them, and they fits and starts and all kinds of cool books like Haggai and Malachi, and they finally build this temple. Half the people cheer. What do the other half do? They cry because they were old enough, they remembered the glory of the other. So this is a small place. That second temple got expanded by Herod the Great. We've talked about Herod before, and we're dealing with place, but people impact places. And Herod was some kind of piece of work.
That's the gentlest way you could possibly.
Yeah. He was an Idumean. I think it's probably accurate, though we don't have really early source, but it's probably accurate that Augustus said of his acquaintance Herod, the most dangerous position in the empire is to be, he wouldn't use the word empire, the most dangerous position in the republic is to be one of Herod's sons. Because the guy was just awful to his own family. He was paranoid, but he seems to have desperately wanted the Jews to respect him. And he funneled brutal warfare, by the way, brutal. But he funneled all the money he confiscated into building this thing that took decades to build and was never really completely finished. It wasn't even a completed work at the time, 40 years after this, when the Romans blew it up. When you go there today, what you're seeing on the ground, those beautiful porphyry columns and things that are half a mile away from the Temple Mount, those are the remains of Solomon's temple. And the fire that the Romans built was so hot that the limestone in the marble actually reacted just as if we made like the Oklahoma City bombing with the limestone fertilizer. It exploded, and that's what caused the whole building to blow. So we have columns from that temple that are a mile away. Okay, so that's the second temple. So I know it's the third temple, but archaeologists call it the second temple, so we'll go with it. So that beautiful, huge temple is there. I said Solomon's temple. I meant Herod's temple. That's Herod's temple that is blown up, and that's what you see. So when he says, "I'll destroy this temple," in 3. By the way, it took the Romans a long time to destroy it. There's a thought there. Now let's get to sense of place. Okay, sense of place has to deal with what's What's the feeling of a place? What do people think of when they see it? When we reach Jesus' ministry recorded here in John, the Jews seem to have felt a combination of pride of place and a sense of being others, outcasts in their own city. Their temple court was free. It was free and open. It was only for Jews and faithful Gentiles, what were called Gentiles of the gate, uncircumcised Gentiles who nonetheless trusted Yahweh. So that seems very free. But at the end of the thing, at the north end, was this huge fortress, the Antonia Fortress, that looked over and watched down on the whole thing. How would that feel? You're there and they're all looking down on you. Jews were not full citizens of their own country, like we said, but they could travel freely. They didn't need papers. They could travel in their own country. In fact, people had safer journeys because of the Roman roads. Jews still traveled to Jerusalem for Passover. They sang the songs of ascent along the journey. We have every indication in Matthew that Jesus sang those songs along the journey as he went. So this John 2 text is built around the Passover and the history of the Passover. Take a stab at it while I take a drink of water, and then we'll walk through Passover. Starts in Egypt.
So, start us in Egypt. Okay, so the Israelites are captive in Egypt. They are slaves, and God sends Moses back to them to deliver them. And Moses goes to Pharaoh, says, Yahweh says, let my people go. Pharaoh gets all angry, doesn't like it. There's the 10 plagues. The last plague is the plague of death of the firstborn. But the Israelites are commanded to take a lamb, slaughter it, and spread its blood over the door. Mm-hmm. And when the angel of death passes by, he will see the blood over, and he will pass over that house, and everybody in there was safe. Any door without that blood on the doorframe, he would not pass over, and the firstborn.
Every language I know, the original Hebrew words, pass and over, the cute little wordplay of Passover, that works in every language I know.
Really?
In German, what you call it is the words for pass and over, and they work together. They make sense. You know, sometimes you put words together, they don't make sense in another tongue. In French, they make sense. That may be just because the Jewish influence around the world, Christian influence around the world. I don't know. Okay, some linguistic genius. We want mail that tells us. You'll see on the site how to write us. I want to know if there's something behind it. Anyway, go right ahead. That just hit me as you were talking.
That's interesting. I think it's especially interesting that it works in English, because English is weird.
Yeah.
There's some great videos online that detail how
so
weird
fun.
English is. It's great. So God delivers his people at Passover. Pharaoh finally has enough. He sends them away, and he rescues his people. So that moment was celebrated mostly on, but often on, throughout Israel's history up to that point.
Right. And when they didn't celebrate it, it's a sad, sad testimony, and we're told about that, like in Judges and sometimes. But here, again, probably some Pharisaical influence here. The return from Babylon, they appear to celebrate Passover. It's mentioned often, and it was a big deal. Think about that city. So you've got this. I want us to understand the sense of place. So when we just read Jerusalem, it's not just Jerusalem. We can get a feel. You're a Jew coming maybe from somewhere around the Roman Empire. Maybe you're a citizen, maybe you're not, but you're coming, you're allowed passage, you get to Jerusalem. It's this wonderful mixed bag of the festival, the celebration of God's salvation, of passing over. If you're healthy in the scriptures, you even know that that's based on faith. We don't know how many did. But then you've also got this Roman presence, this brooding Antonia fortress right over everything. You've got the money changers that are converting all the coins from around the world, but they're doing it without a sense of worship. By the way, probably the issue is not that they're extorting money, because Rome actually didn't put up with that too much. It's probably just the fact that they are not doing it where they should. They're instead doing it in a place of worship. But regardless, for some reason, Jesus is angry about that. So you're a pilgrim. You're walking in. You go to purchase your lamb. You've got your family. You've sung the Hillel songs as you come along, the songs of ascent. What's it like for you when you come in? What do you think? You've thought about this a little bit.
I think to compare it to something that I'm familiar with,
Yeah.
I think it would be like 4th of July for us is a huge deal. So we get the fireworks, we get the stuff. And I've actually never been on the East Coast on 4th of July.
Right.
Like Washington, D.C. or New York or some place Boston. I have not been there. I would love to experience a 4th of July in Boston or in Washington, D.C. because I think like the center of where that happened, where that event took place is really different from the places that I've lived.
Right.
In Washington, Colorado, here. And Texas is very, very independent. We're super, like, there's a lot of hyper patriotic people. There's a lot of fireworks. It gets crazy. It's super fun. But I think it'd be very different in that place for that celebration. And I think it's definitely not the same. But I think in a way it's similar. That Jerusalem is where people went to celebrate Passover. If they couldn't travel, it wasn't the end of the world.
Right.
They could still celebrate Passover. They could still do it with their family. It still mattered. It was all good. But to be able to go to Jerusalem and to be with the rest of the people, and I kind of go back to Acts 2. It's a few years later, but when Peter stands up.
Only a few years later. Isn't that weird to think of?
Yeah, it's just like, it's not long. Peter stands up and he calls out where people are from, and you look at a map of where he's calling people out. And I wrote this down because it was super interesting. But the Parthians, the Medes, the Elamites, Mesopotamia, that's kind of a big place.
Right.
Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, Asia. Asia's been big for a long time. Phrygia, Pamphylia, Egypt, Libya, like it's people from absolutely everywhere come together in this one place for this one event. Oh. And I've been to Jerusalem when it's busy. And it's shoulder to shoulder people as you're walking through the narrow streets and it's crowded. Yeah. But I don't think it's crowded for me like it was crowded for them at Passover, because Jerusalem's not a city that was designed to get around easily.
No, and it was smaller then than it is now.
Yeah.
Parts of it were smaller, parts were bigger, but the part around the temple was smaller. And I love the 4th of July idea because it made me think of a friend of mine who's a pastor in Massachusetts, and he sadly often feels fairly much like an other in his own city.
Interesting.
There's not a lot of, but at Christmas and 4th of July, there's a lot of winsomeness toward the Christian idea, and he sees people come to Christ. It's very exciting. And he's a real patriotic guy, and Bostonians tend to not be that much, except 4th of July. And he goes every year to the harbor, and the Boston Pops, I don't know if they still do this, but he told me this years ago, the Boston Pops play aimed out toward the water, and everything that will float. I mean, people are on little life raft things, they're on boats, they're on yachts, the whole harbor's filled with people, and they shoot the fireworks over the harbor. You see it reflected on the water. It's packed with people, and you hear the Boston Pops playing Stars and Stripes Forever. And he says, it's not like, it's not like I'm not in Boston, but I'm in Boston. So Jerusalem's still Jerusalem. It's still conquered by Alexander, conquered by the Babylonians, the Persians, wasn't conquered by the Persians, but settled by them, conquered by Alexander, broken by Rome. It's no longer Jerusalem, but at Passover,
everybody comes together, and there's a sense of unity, even though they're from all over the place. They're there together for the same purpose.
Yep. How good it is to brothers to dwell. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's Passover. All right, next part of our text, we go to chapter 3. We're going to cover this part. Jesus meets with Nicodemus. We mentioned him earlier. Our purpose is not to go into that. I hope you will study Nicodemus. But in verse 22, we get our next place. After this, Jesus and his disciples went to the Judean countryside, where he spent time with them and baptized. John also was baptizing in Aenon near Salimin, because there was plenty of water there. People were coming and being baptized, since John had not yet been thrown into prison. Then a dispute arose between John's disciples and a Jew about purification. So they came to John and told him, Rabbi, the one you testified about, the one who was with you across the Jordan is baptizing, and everyone's going to him. John responded, no one can receive anything unless it has been given to him from heaven. You yourselves can testify that I said, I am not the Messiah, but I have been sent ahead of him. He who has the bride is the groom. But the groom's friend who stands by and listens for him rejoices greatly at the groom's voice. So this joy of mine is complete. He must increase, but I must decrease. Okay. Can you tell if you hold that up? You think we're... Okay. So this is a little shot of a map that Jared and I have seen a number of times in Medeba, what was called Madaba back then. And it is one of the most important maps in the world. And this shows the location. So there's a couple of arrows on there. The one at the top is Aenon, which is near Safim. So that's, or Saphas. So Jesus gone to the Judean countryside, right? He's baptizing up near the Sea of Galilee. This big body of water is the Sea of Galilee. By the way, this map was made in the 6th century. It shows the location of many of the churches in the ancient Near East. It's going to switch cameras, so that won't even be shown, will it? Because it goes.
We can put it over.
Okay, great. All right.
Superimpose
All right.
it.
So on the east side of the river, let me hold it one more time.
Okay.
On the east side of the river is Bethany beyond the Jordan. All right, you see that? That's where John baptized Jesus. By the time this map was made, that city was called Beit Bara, and it's in small type. And we'll talk about why that matters in a minute. On the west, it identifies this place called Aenon, which is probably the Enon from the Bible, where is now Saphas. Say that 3 times fast. Saphas. Okay, so that's the location.
Biblical tongue twisters.
Those are Saphas. What Greek lunatic made up that name? Anyway, I know it means things. It means place of water. So let's talk about locale, government, and systems. A few things to note. On the map at Saphas, there's a small building, formerly known as Aenon. In the language of the Madaba map shows every church that was known to the map maker, and it's an amazing mosaic piece of work. Shows every church known to the map maker in the Mediterranean world in the 500s. So that means if there's a building there, that means that congregation did not just rent space. Most congregations rented space. We do it today when we plant churches. We use elementary schools or other places.
Yeah.
Paul one time had to use a place called the School of Tyrannus, which is a nickname. Nobody ever named their child Tyrannus, but it means terrible, just like Tyrannosaurus Rex. And so you wonder if that was an affectionate. Some kids are like, man, I love that guy. We're going to call him Tyrannus. You know, kind of like you call the guy Shorty who's really tall, or if he was actually a terrible
person. Or imagine planting that church. Hey, where do you guys meet? At the terrible school.
The terrible
Just
school.
Come and meet us there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
But this one has a building. That's why there's a building there. Okay, so that's important. So where this is happening is a place that at least by the 5th century is going to have a church building. So this is a place of some significance. Water, we know, is there. This area also was very, very Hellenized.
So really quickly, what does that mean in just layman language? What does it mean that it was Hellenized?
It means that when, here, you can hold this one up too. All right,
Okay.
We've used this map before, I think. So this area called the Decapolis, that's a Greek word for the 10 cities, so Deca. It's a Greco-Roman place where Jewish teaching is very low on the people's priorities, and Greco-Romanist is much higher. So these were wealthy cities. Jerash was the largest one, but even smaller ones like Skytopolis were wealthy cities. Mm-hmm. They did very well in the time after Alexander. They managed to kind of resist some of the re-Hebraization that came when the return from Babylonian exile, and this stayed a place of pretty heavily, so Hellenized. The Greeks call their land Hellas. They don't call it Greece. So Hellenized means very Greek.
Greek. So even the Jews, if they lived a Greek lifestyle, that would be a Hellenized Jew.
Right. So it's a city in the Decapolis where Jesus drives pigs out of in a different gospel. Yeah. You put that together, these These people are raising pigs.
If that was a Jew raising pigs, they're not really following the Torah.
Not at all.
Not much.
So, the reason that matters is it means that this place where John has gone to, he's doing heavy lifting. He's sharing the good news of Jesus, not like down south near Jerusalem. This is a tough place. And the name Aenon, by the way, this is just like the later name Aenon. It's actually not a Greek word. Sapsaphras is, but I did it that time. Aenon just is a Hebrew word for spring. And they put the AE, the E sound from Greek, which is a Greek thing, like Egypt for centuries was spelled AE, the AE together, Egypt. So they put that there, but it's actually trying to play off of a Hebrew word. So it's just spring. So this place had a spring. The Jordan can run very low in summers of little rain, especially. You've been there when the Jordan was low.
Oh,
yeah.
it's real low.
Trickling by, yeah. And not right now. They've had a ton of rain this year. But so John moves up in the hills to the west of the river, baptizing at a spring. Now this...
It's also much cleaner up there.
It's true.
Down south, it is
the Jordan's
dirty,
beautiful up
muddy.
north.
Yeah, up north it's crisp and clear and crystal and beautiful.
Yeah, whenever I've done baptisms there, I have tended to go north of the sea, where it's coming down out of the mountains and it's spring-fed streams. And if you go in the spring or winter, it can be pretty rough. Like I've had people go, it's okay. We're in a little eddy here.
It will be a quick baptism.
But it's
water.
and
I baptized a family one time in Colorado. They wanted to be baptized in the river. There's a river that went right past our church, out of the mountains. The headwaters were in Aspen. It's called the Roaring Fork. And they're like, we would baptize either at a pool or in the river. They were insistent. They wanted to get baptized in the river. Headwaters are like 40 miles away. It was... I think it might have been May. Maybe. It was...
Was it 45 degrees?
It was so cold. There's this little place that they've kind of built out where the water kind of calms down and swirls a little bit so you can get in the water a little bit. And I went in and I stepped in. As soon as my foot hit the water, I stopped and I looked at it. I was like, this is going to be quick. Like, you're going to get in and we're just doing this right now, real fast. We're just going to say the things on the shore and go.
All the prayers and everything here.
It was the fastest baptism ever.
That's awesome. Well, there's a place when you go now. Sometimes there's unrest in this area. There's some Druze settlements in this area now, so you can't get there. I was there one time, and there's a little. It's a pretty cute little spring. There was a shrine built there. May have been a church. Eusebius in the 4th century, the 300s, he said this was Aenon near Salimin. We don't really know if he was right, but it hadn't really been excavated and studied. So John's at Aenon, Jesus a little further south. Each of them are baptizing spring-fed, living water pools in the hills. Okay, so that's the locale. That's the location, locale. Now let's talk about sense of space, the feel of the space, sense of place. I think the biggest thing here is John's doing a lot of hard work, but attention is shifting to Jesus. That's the background for the conflict here. The sparks really start to fly when this unnamed Jew mistakenly, I think very mistakenly, equates John's baptism with another mikveh, which we talked about in our first episode, a purification ritual. Real quickly, if you would walk everybody through what a mikveh is, because that's not what's going on here. Go ahead.
Mikveh was a ritual cleansing bath. The water just had to be deep enough for them to submerge themselves and get clean, and then they come out, and then they could enter the temple grounds because they were at that point ritually clean.
And that's a beautiful worship picture.
Yeah.
But that's to use New Testament terms, that's a sanctification picture, whereas baptism's a justification picture. John's baptizing in Jesus' name. He's pointing to him as Messiah. So he's saying, identifying with him, trusting him, again, all the way back to Abraham, means that you are different. When you come through the water, you are a different person. He takes away the sins of the world. So that means Jesus is getting a lot of attention because his disciples are pointing to him. John's disciples are pointing to him. John's pointing to him. And so all the followers who learned from and watched John, and John was how did Jesus put it later in John? He was a glowing light for a while, and you rejoiced in his light. They're watching their influence go down every day. And I love old Dr. Blum, Edwin Blum. He said this. I copied this over. The group following Jesus was larger. John's disciples may have been angry and jealous. They complained that Jesus, of whom John had testified, had now captured the nation's attention. They longed for the former days when everyone went to hear John. And Mark 1:5 says, it's hyperbole, but everyone went to hear him. He was the headliner. Okay, so with that sense of conflict, John shows us the right way to relieve friction. And this is, have you got 27 through 30?
I do, yeah.
Okay, so listen to this.
John responded, "No one can receive anything unless it has been given to him from heaven. You yourselves can testify that I said I am not the Messiah, but I have been sent ahead of him. He who has the bride is the groom, but the groom's friend, who stands by and listens for him, rejoices greatly at the groom's voice. So this joy of mine is complete." And I love this line. He must increase, but I must decrease. That is like the ultimate humility statement right there. It's not a looking down on myself,
right?
But it's
no.
elevating.
It's trust.
Yeah.
I believe he's the point. So I see three things John lays out, and these become very important, and they're part of the sense of place. And when I read Aenon near Salimin, I need to have this in mind. That John's saying, first, you trust God's provision. No one has anything if God didn't give it to him. Everything is of grace. So I need to be amazed and grateful I have anything. I deserve nothing. That's what Aenon tells me, and that's what John's saying. And it's one thing when non-Christians get, and I know not everyone listening to us is a Christian, and we love you all. What an honor to get to study with you.
Glad they would take the time to listen to us and hear what the Bible's saying.
When you non-Christians get jealous and you demand what other people have, I have to say, it kind of makes sense because you don't know a perfect giver. And so you think it's just a human point of view. We got to make everything equitable. But I hear that from believers, and that's absurd. Not that there isn't injustice and we don't need to work against that. The Bible talks about that. But my attitude needs to be Aenon near Salimin. No one has anything that doesn't give them from God. I don't deserve anything. Why should I be unhappy that somebody else is getting attention? This reminds me a little bit of when my dad had to sell our business, and there was a horrible downturn. The business we were in went from about 7,000 companies around the United States doing this business to 4.
Whoa.
Consolidation to the max, right?
Yikes.
So we were blessed to get to sell it, and it was fine. But I remember riding with my dad around town. I don't know if I ever told you this story, but I was riding with Dad around town, and I was trying to gently kind of bring up, well, what are you going to do, and how are you going to feel? But I was coming from how are you going to feel about yourself? You're be important. Mm-hmm. And he stopped the car and pulled over. He was driving, and he said, "Boy, I'm worried about you." I said, "About me?" He said, "If I'm hearing you right, you think I need my name on a door to be important." That's a problem, son. When you talk about your understanding of life here, I'll clean dirty streets and praise God with it and enjoy. I don't deserve anything. It's a joy to get to work and serve the Lord, which I knew, but it was amazing how much I didn't have. That's the sense of place of Aenon near Salimin. I don't deserve anything. It's a joy to get to work for the Lord.
Man, that's good.
Yeah. Dad, boy, you stinker. Anyway, so second, your role. I think that's, and that's, maybe I'm parsing these out too much, but I think John's saying he's got a news flash. Ready? Life's not about you. You're not the bridegroom. Jesus is. You're not God. You aren't Messiah. The sense that John speaks in this place reminds us it is a blessing to enjoy your wonderful role. And it doesn't matter what that role is. You don't need a sign on the door. Your role is to be Jesus' friend, which is pretty amazing. One aspect of weddings, I talked about this once in a message I taught. Very few people notice the hard work of the best man. I've done over 200 weddings, every one of which was a joy. The best man, I wrote down some things. The best man in our modern weddings has these duties: taking care of all the groom's needs, leading the bachelor party, giving a speech at the reception, or sometimes rehearsal dinner. It's kind of changed through the years.
Yeah.
Staying late to clean the church, returning all the clothes that the groom rented, if he rented them, mailing the wedding license to the county. I usually do that one for him because I feel sorry for the guy. Now, the one everybody hates the most is that best man speech, right? And very few people do it well. Few think they do it well, and even fewer actually do it well. The speech is supposed to be like what John gives here. He's full of excitement for the bridegroom, right? Look at this, is so great, it's great. But these are ones I copied down. These are some that I have heard. These are actual speeches I've heard. These are lines from speeches. These are awesome. I sure wish I could be the groom someday and not always the best man.
Oh my gosh.
When you...
all the bridesmaids are looking over there.
Right.
Going, no, I don't think so.
Enjoy your best man. When you, and he pointed to the groom, first introduced me to the bride, I didn't like her at all. Which actually kind of worked around and became sweet. But still.
But dang, that's a terrible way to start.
It's like when you're at a restaurant and the server, you say thank you, and they say, no problem. They just said two negatives. No and problem. That's not edifying. Anyway, here's another one. It took you long enough, he said to the groom. We were beginning to think you were gay. No, really.
Yikes.
I can't believe she agreed to marry you. I mean, she's beautiful, and you are. And the guy paused for a while. You. That one actually was very honest. I can't believe we're here. When you guys broke up last year, I was sure it was all over. This may be the one I hated the most. I probably shouldn't say this, but it's awesome that the bride is so rich. Oh,
you definitely married up.
Yeah. And then this, I've actually run into this one more than a few times, especially the Gen Z generation and their desire to signal virtuosity sometimes. While it's great that we're all here to celebrate, it was given in this tone too. At least one of them was. I remember, we're all here to celebrate today, but we should pause for a moment and remember the thousands who are being displaced by, and whatever tragedy of the moment. At that one, it was a war somewhere. Those are terrible speeches for one reason. None of them exalts the groom.
No.
Not a one. We are Jesus' best people. We are exalting the groom. That's our raison d'etre. That is our point of life. He is the groom. He's Jesus, the Messiah. So John knows that. And in this time and place, he says, I'm here to serve Jesus. I am entrusted with exalting him in his eternal kingdom, and it's a delight. I got to ask, is that how we live? I'm not sure that it is. It's very easy with the real struggles of life to forget that this isn't the real struggle of life. Life is beginning now if you're a believer in Jesus, but this is the tiniest modicum of eternity, and this is just the lab. This isn't even the real playground. Mm-mm. So, third thing the baptizer does, I think he gives the bottom line handling of problems, and you said it so well. It's maybe the most moving statement in this entire first part of John. Read it for us again, verse 30.
He must increase, but I must decrease.
So when you've done a wedding, and you've done weddings, you've done a bunch of them. I remember you did one because I had a stomach bug, and I was trying to fight through it, and I loved this young couple, and I was driving to the wedding when I had to, shall we say, lean out of the car, and I called Jared and said, I can't.
Not gonna make it. Will you please go do this wedding? It's in 2 hours.
2 hours.
Yeah, I'll be there.
Yep,
and I met them for the first time.
And they were so gracious.
I went in, and I did hear afterwards that like one of the parents was like, I thought you'd known him forever. Like,
good. That's good.
Oh,
okay,
man.
So at that wedding, Jared mattered, right? The officiant matters. It's important.
It's a role.
But is the wedding about you?
Oh, dear Lord, no.
And
no.
And woe, I mean, most people don't do what we do, but woe if you try to make it about you, right? It's
like
about
a referee making a game about themselves. Let's not talk about umpires or
won't
referees.
I won't
We don't
say
have
any
nearly
names.
enough time for
I
that.
won't say any names, Joe West. But sorry. Okay, so let's take this sense of place. How can we, Jared? Give us some ways. Let's be practical. How can we live out? We read Aenon near Salimin, just sounds like a place, but no. This is where John says this. This is a sense of this place, which, to his credit, is why Eusebius was trying to locate it. He had the sense 200 years, 300 years after this happened, almost 300, to say this would be an important place to remember. Again, I don't know if he got it right or not. We haven't dug there. We don't know. But it is something to remember. So how do we make sure that we live out this sense of place, that he increases? While we love our role, we exalt Jesus, and he increases as we decrease. How can we do that?
Oh, there's so many ways. I heard it said once that, specifically about pastors, if you're too proud to clean the toilet, you are not worthy of being in the pulpit.
Well said.
And I think that's right. I remember when I interviewed at Frisco Bible many years ago, Summer and I were walking to the main entrance, and there was some trash on the ground, and we were talking about stuff as we walked in, and she just stopped mid-sentence, went over, picked up the candy wrapper, whatever it was, and threw it in the trash can that was literally right there.
Yeah.
But it might have blown out, a raccoon, I don't know what it was, but it was there, and she just made the comment. She was like, our staff as a whole, we do what needs to be done because it needs to be done. Nobody on our staff is going to be above picking up trash. Like, this is what we do.
That's good.
And it was a great example. It was one of the things that really attracted me to Frisco Bible, because I've tried to do that. Some days better than others.
I've got an interesting corollary to that. I totally agree with what you said. If you're not willing to clean the toilet, you shouldn't be preaching. Your role doesn't matter. It's all about Jesus, who blesses every one of us in the things we get to do. But you've got to be careful. Sometimes some of the things that look more, they're actually all the same in the Lord's eyes, but look more mundane or more ugly or more difficult, they're more attractive because they can give you a feeling of holiness.
Sure.
And that may not be your role.
Yeah.
So this is 25 years ago, I was cleaning toilets. There was a problem in a bathroom, and I'm perfectly delighted to do that. But one of the elders of the church grabbed me, and he was pretty unhappy, and he said, when do you start preaching? And I said, I've got 5 more minutes till the next service. And he said, this is not what you're here to do.
Yeah.
You need to be praying and getting your head together, because that's what you're set aside to do. And you're just doing this because it makes you feel good. And it was right.
Yeah. Which
Yeah.
actually leads to another factor that is important, and that is passing the ball or delegating, which is really hard sometimes, because if I delegate something to someone else, there's a risk that they're not going to do it the same way I will.
Which is the right way.
Which is, obviously, the way that I do it is going to be better than the way somebody else would choose to do it. I think, no, that's not true. But it is like, to entrust someone else with a job, to give them the opportunity to serve and to use their gifts in that. In all likelihood, they're going to do it way better than me, especially if it's something admin related or something that is like, something that I don't love doing. I need to give it to somebody who does love doing it. If somebody loves spreadsheets, God bless them. I'm super grateful for them. I don't understand them, but I'm glad they're here. I need to hand off the spreadsheet to them for them to do their magic wizardry with it and just make it work.
Looking at you, Laura.
Exactly. There's so many.
One of our CFO, actually.
She's so good. She knows macros. It's nuts. I don't understand.
She's a genius, but don't tell her I said that. Yeah.
Well, if she watches this, she'll find out.
Oh.
I guess we'll find out if she watches this.
Yeah.
If she sends us a Slack message.
Yeah.
I think that is important, though.
Yeah.
And it's, for some people who are gifted in many things, that can also be a challenge, because it's a lot of times easier to just do it myself than it is to hand it off and have somebody else do it.
Yeah. No, that's spot on. I would agree. When people surrender into greatness, when they descend into greatness, I must decrease that he might increase. it actually, and folks, if you just think about this, when you've had employees or your children or other people who, I'm not talking about being lazy, embracing their development and their role and their greatness in the Lord, and they do it by humility, by descending, by exalting others, by pointing to Jesus, you don't think less of them.
No.
You think more.
Yeah.
And in fact, those are the people, this is the most counterintuitive but true factor in all of life. Those are the people you promote. And not just because they're humble, but because they are humbly developing. And John's developing. He's doing what he's here to do. But it's all about the Lord.
And it does. I would add that it helps people discover their gifts. You might see something in them that they never thought of themselves.
Yep.
They may negative self-talk. They may not think they're worth much.
Right.
And when somebody who loves and follows Jesus says to them, I see this in you. Will you please do this for the church? It can transform their life as well. As well as be a blessing to the church. And so I think withholding that actually harms both the pastor, the leader, the person, and the body.
Yep. All right, let's pray together, everybody, shall we? Lord, we thank you for this chance, this opportunity to grow, and we pray that we will descend into greatness, that we will enjoy the main thing, which is you, the bridegroom. And we thank you so much for the opportunity to work in that sense of Aenon near Salimin. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Hey, thanks for joining us today. Super glad that you are either listening to this on whatever podcast platform device, or it could be Android, Apple, I don't care. Just super honored that you would join us in this, and we hope that it's something that is useful to you and that it's used of God to bless your life. And we would really appreciate it. It would be great if you would take the time to subscribe, to leave a rating and a review. That will really help the word spread for what we're doing with this and hopefully get it in front of other people. So next time around, we're going to head north to Samaria.
Not Alaska, Samaria. North to Samaria.
But it's not
4.
up. We're not heading up to Samaria.
I know.
We're heading north.
North. And it is, anyway, that'll be fun. Samaria, you bet.
Here we go.